Welcome back to the Chronicles of the King podcast, where we take a deep dive into the life and legacy of Elvis Presley. I'm Megan.
And I'm Tessa, and we are two 20-something Elvis fans dedicated to keeping his legacy alive with a research-based approach.
Whether you're a die-hard Elvis fan or simply curious about a man who changed the course of music and culture, you're in the right place.
We are here to unpack the myths, explore the music, and get to the heart of Elvis's enduring impact.
Every other week, we'll bring you research, untold stories, and fresh perspectives on Elvis's journey. From his humble beginnings to his legendary performances, we're here to shed light on it all.
So settle in for a podcast made with a lot of TLC for the man himself, one story at a time. Hey guys, welcome back. So we are continuing our series on Elvis's family. Our last episode, we talked about Elvis's mother, Gladys, and her side of the family. And so today we are going to be talking about his father, Vernon, and Vernon's parents.
Yeah, so we're going to start off with the family tree as we did last time. Now, we got some of these off of Find It Great, but they're also supported by Elvis Presley, which was Vernon's brother, in A Presley Speaks, his book. So first, we got the father. We have Jesse Denning McLowell Presley. Mother, we have Minnie Mae Hood Presley, and then their children in chronological order, because that's how we do things here. We have Elvis Presley, Vernon Elvis Presley, and then the daughters Delta, Gladys, and Nashville, or Nash for short.
Yeah, and so all of this whole story starts with Jesse. Now, he was allegedly a little bit of a philanderer.
Yes.
He was the son of Rosella Presley, and he was born in 1896 in East Tupelo. Although his name was Jesse, he was often called Jesse D, or JD, which I think is just interesting, little nicknames. So some of the information when we were looking it up, they would refer to him as Jesse, but also JD, but also D, and so it was a little confusing.
But yeah, we got it. There's many, but we understand. Mm-hmm. But if you notice, we didn't name a father for Jesse, and that is because Rosella, she actually had 9 illegitimate children. So none of her children knew who their father was, and it is her daughter, actually, who is quoted as saying that they were never told. Her children never knew who their father was. It was just a mystery and something I don't think we're ever really going to know today. And this quote we got was from Elvis Australia. So,
yeah. And Rosella, her maiden name was Presley. So that's where the whole name Presley comes from, which obviously that's a little unusual. But given that the paternity of some of her children was a little called into question, she just passed down her own surname. And there was another little bit about her personality that she supported her family through sharecropping. And so I think that kind of goes to show what kind of mother figure that Jesse grew up with in his life. A pretty strong-minded woman, it seems.
Yeah, definitely strong, independent. She was the head of the household. She was the one passing down the name. So I definitely think you can say that about her.
Right.
And talking about her personality, I think the best way to start with Jesse is to talk about his personality and some of his characteristics that were picked up by others who were around him.
Mm-hmm. So his brother, Joseph, said that he was a dapper dresser. Clothes were one of the most important things of his life, and he paraded around town like a peacock. He hated poverty and didn't want people to know he was poor, and he felt that if he wore a tailor-made suit, people would look up to him. We put this little quote in there because it reminded us of somebody, another dapper dresser we might know.
Somebody who refused to wear jeans. Yeah.
Perhaps.
So that's why that was just a little bit, maybe it's genetic, maybe it's not, who knows, but it did remind us of our man, Elvis.
Right. And a little more about JD's personality. Apparently, he was mean as hell. And in Alana Nash's Baby Let's Play House, she says that the family clucked about Jesse's habit of locking up his whiskey so Minnie Mae couldn't get to it, and laughed at his stinginess in dictating how many pieces of cheese she could slice or biscuits she could serve when guests came calling. So that was one sort of aspect of his personality. It seems like he
Definitely.
was mean and a little bit harsh. And then
Say the least.
right, and then Vester actually says something different.
Yeah, and so this is kind of where I feel like our podcast style is. We want to give you two sides of the story. So you have the one side of people saying that he was really mean, he was stingy, but then you have people with like his own son, Jesse, Fester, who is saying Jesse is a good worker who loves his family and takes care of them as well as anyone can during such times.
Right, so there's kind
So
of this contrasting view of
yeah.
Jesse's, this kinda mean guy, but also
Mhm.
apparently a hard worker who loved his family.
Yeah.
And this kinda leads us into, the drama of his divorce from
Yes.
Minnie Mae, so Vernon's mother.
Mhm.
Um,
Which I will say versus researching the maternal side, I feel like researching the paternal side, there was a lot more drama, there was a lot more substance to the research that you had to weed through, I guess. So,
yeah, there was definitely
yeah,
more, like, family drama, I feel like,
definitely.
on the Presley side of the family, from
Yeah.
what we could kinda gather, so
And again, this is also kind of there's always two sides to every story. Some people say something, some people say another. Um, but talking about the separation divorce of Jesse and Minnie Mae, so the whole thing started when Jesse moved to Louisville, Kentucky from Tupelo, Mississippi. And I think there's a bit of speculation whether it's between like 1942, 1945, but it's somewhere around there. But he ended up moving. He took the job in Louisville and he worked in Columbia Manufacturing Company, and that exact address was 845 South 9th as a wood mantle assembler and cabinet maker.
right, and so Vester kinda says in his book, a little bit more going with the idea that, Jesse
Mhm.
really cared about his family and kind of was like a good, hardworking family man.
Yeah.
Vester says, of course, he wanted Minnie Mae to go with him, even though her children were grown and she realizes they have a life of their own. She cannot bring herself to go away and leave them. The weeks stretch into months, the months into years. Jesse does not return home, and Minnie Mae does not go to him. And then eventually in 1949, Jesse files for a divorce from Minnie Mae. And it's kind of interesting because when we read from Minnie Mae's perspective, she says that he deserted her.
Yeah. Which I feel like it's in a way it's kind of they think of it as a mutual desertion almost.
Right. Um, but Jesse claimed in his filing for the divorce that Minnie Mae had deserted him. Um,
Mhm.
And yeah, Minnie Mae said apparently that she didn't desert her husband. He deserted me and has been living with another woman. He hasn't sent me any money in over a year. I'm not able to make a living.
Yeah.
And the judge actually listened to both sides. And then finally, they were granted the divorce. There was no alimony for Minnie Mae. And JD then ended up getting remarried.
Yeah, so that's the judge listened to both sides just as we're doing right now.
Yes.
But yeah, but they always said like there's always this disputes about their divorce and their separation. But one of those things that people kind of talked about was that it could be Jesse's drinking that actually played kind of a role in that separation. And again, kind of going back to some people saying, he was a hardworking man. His brother Joseph was quoted in the book Early Elvis, The Tupelo Years, was quoted as saying he was an honest man, but he enjoyed drinking whiskey and was often involved in drunken bar brawls.
Dang.
Dang, I know.
And
So
then in on Elvis Australia, they also kind of highlight this mean streak
mhm.
of Jesse's,
Yeah.
saying that Vernon was apparently scared of JD and knew that any transgression of his father's rules could provoke a
Mhm.
beating. This, combined with Jesse's drunken and philandering ways, caused permanent harm to the relationship between Vernon and Jesse.
Yeah.
In many respects, it was as if Vernon had no father, as Jesse repeated his own father's abandonment on his children.
Mhm.
So once again, we're
But
getting that double-sided, like,
I
was
know.
he a good guy? Did he
I
desert
think
his family? I
there's
don't
a little
know.
bit of both there, I guess we could say. He
I
might be
agree.
an honest, hardworking. and, there to take care of his family, but he probably also had, the other side that also was there at some points. But yeah, but we're inclusive. That's, I feel like, the point of this podcast. We're going to present the facts, let you decide, come to own conclusions. But
Yeah.
yeah, so talking that even though Vernon it was said that Vernon didn't really have a father figure, they kind of grew distant. Jesse ended up actually kind of playing a little bit of a role in Elvis's life and being present.
Right. So on Sunday, this is also from Elvis Australia. Literally, shout out Elvis Australia. They have all the sources.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
so on Sunday, November 25th, 1956, Elvis played two shows in Louisville, Kentucky.
Mhm.
And his grandfather, Jesse, lived in Louisville at the time. And Elvis visited with him in his home both in 1956 when he first went to Louisville, and then also later in 1971 when Elvis toured again and he went
Yep.
through Louisville. Apparently, on the first occasion, he gave Jesse a car and
And I believe a TV set, wasn't it?
yes, yes, and a new
Yes.
TV set. And then the second time, he came back around. So the second time Elvis was in Louisville in 1971, he introduced his grandfather to the crowd. So obviously there was a little
Yeah.
bit of a interesting relationship between,
Definitely.
yeah, between Elvis and
And
Jesse.
I feel like it gets a little bit more interesting in 1958 when a lot of people say that Jesse started to piggyback on Elvis's success. And we actually have, some dates here. We have July 9th, 1958. And this is when Jesse actually made an appearance on CBS's I've Got a Secret. And on this appearance, he was actually trying to promote his own music career. So he was talking a little bit about Elvis, talking about some of the songs that he was singing. And you can find these clips still today. I highly suggest that you check them out.
Yeah, I'll
But
post them on the Instagram so you
yeah,
guys can
please
see. It's really
do
funny.
it. They are. It's quite interesting. And so during this appearance, he sang a couple songs. What were they? They were the Billy Goat song. Sang the Billy Goat
Mhm.
song, not Old Shep, but the Billy Goat
But
song.
similar vein.
Similar vibes. And he sang Swinging in the Orchard. And this was said that he did this to capitalize on Elvis's career. So
Yeah, kinda
interesting.
connecting that Presley name
Yeah,
to his own budding music career, I guess.
exactly.
And then just a month after Jesse did this CBS appearance, he
Mhm.
did attend Gladys Presley's funeral. So, in August of 1958, he went to Memphis and attended her funeral, um, which I think is kinda
Yeah,
interesting that even if
it
there's that
is.
strained relationship between Vernon
Mhm.
and his own father, that I guess, like, Elvis kind of rubbed them back together a little bit,
Yeah.
that Elvis, like, made an effort to see his grandfather even though he'd been somewhat of a deserter or a
Yeah.
hardworking guy.
And
I'm not
also, I feel like
judging.
maybe on Jesse's behalf, that's like maybe connections aren't the greatest, but I'm still
Right.
gonna show up and show my support for you guys. Well, and then in 1971, at the age of 76, Jesse actually passed away at Methodist Evangelical, yes, Hospital in Louisville. And after that, um, he was interned at the Louisville Memorial Gardens West. If you're curious, where he is buried today.
Yes. We got this information from, you guessed it, Find a Grave.
Mhm. Yes,
Um, so now we're gonna talk
not
a little
morbid
bit.
at all.
No, not at all.
No.
So now we're gonna talk a little bit about our queen, Minnie Mae.
Yes.
Um, she's also known to a lot of people in the Elvis community as Dodger, and we will
Mhm.
explain why momentarily.
Momentarily.
Yeah.
Yes. So Minnie Mae Hood was born in Fulton, Itawamba County, Mississippi, to William and Mary Warren Hood on June 17th, 1890. Now, before Tessa gets into Dodger's nickname, the birthday of Minnie Mae is a little bit debated, I guess. And this is from Baby Let's Play House, but the quote is, "It can't be said that this is the exact date of Minnie Mae's birth, according to this statement." Vernon had relied upon his attorney to verify Minnie Mae's date of birth, which was necessary for her to secure a passport, and the passport was for when they went to Germany when Elvis was in the army, but no record of her birth was readily available. So,
And this is like not unusual for the time, right? Like it's pretty common that
yeah,
records were not as well kept.
exactly.
Especially there were high levels of illiteracy, and
Mhm.
so people might not have been as like adept to put documents out
Correct.
there.
Also, we have today, people are usually born in hospitals. Hospitals are
Right.
really set up to do, the birth certificate, social security stuff. That wasn't really the case in 1890.
No.
So that's kind of why.
So then
Yeah.
Dodgers. So
Dodger.
Minnie Mae was affectionately nicknamed Dodger by Elvis after he threw a ball at her and she was like quick with it and
Yeah.
dodged the ball. Um, but there's actually not a lot written about Minnie Mae before her getting together with Jesse.
Yeah.
Um, I would
It's really
love
interesting.
let me tell you, that's a movie I want to see. I want to see her life. I feel like she's
Mm,
an
okay.
interesting figure.
She's definitely interesting. I have to give her that.
Yeah,
So let's talk about who she was, though, like, I guess, as a person. So getting into that personality, those characteristics.
right.
I there's I feel like a lot, but not a lot written about Minnie May. But the stuff
Mhm.
that we do get is pretty good. And
It's all
so,
detailed for
oh
sure.
yeah. And I feel like this also kind of ties a little bit of JD, Jesse, into the situation. This is from Priscilla Presley in her book Elvis and Me. She has said, she wanted you to believe she held a grudge against JD Presley, but Dodger was a forgiving heart, and I believe she cared for him. She helped raise Elvis as if he were her own, somewhat spoiling him as a grandmother does. She always rushed to his defense when she felt Gladys was too stern. So I feel like that
Right.
shows, like, the softness in her. Like, she was still forgiving. She wasn't really a cold woman.
Right. And I think that like she had a personal relationship with Priscilla. At least
Oh,
that's what
yeah,
Priscilla in Priscilla's book, she definitely highlights how like
definitely.
grandma made her feel super at home at Graceland.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just like Priscilla. So much later,
Right.
when Elvis was dating Ginger Alden,
Mhm.
so from like 76 till he passed away, Ginger talks about her relationship with Dodger too. And she says, it was nice talking with Dodger. She was sweet, opinionated, and funny. Dodger was the first person to really make me feel like part of the family.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Linda Thompson in her book doesn't really mention a lot about
Mhm.
Dodger. So we were kind of trying to rifle through to see if we could get some important other people's perspectives on who Minnie Mae was, what her character was like, and we really didn't find anything in Linda's book. So that's just
Interesting
interesting.
little yes, just an interesting little fact. But so, like I said, it's always interesting to find somebody else's perspective. And so these are perspectives from the women in Elvis's life, but she also, I feel like, had a good impact on the guys that were always around, the Memphis Mafia. And one person in particular was Joe Esposito. Now, Joe Esposito was around in Germany, so he met her there. And he says Grandma was tall, thin, stooped woman with razor sharp faculties. That included a dry sense of humor. Her hair was always done neatly, and a fresh apron always covered her dress because I think she was always cooking. Even though she no longer stirred pots in the kitchen, it was found here. It, if we found her there, we teased her. Oh, are you eating again? We'd ask. Oh, shut up and leave me alone, she'd snap back, and we'd crack up, including Grandma. She passed days in her rocking chair watching television. A chew of snuff lodged between the inside of her cheek and her gums. Her vision wasn't very good. She wore dark glasses because bright lights bothered her.
Oh,
I
that
like it.
she was like sassy with the guys.
Yeah, she was like almost
And
one of them, I feel like.
well, and also just compared to the depiction of grandma as like, I don't feel like Ginger or Priscilla make her seem like not sharp or
Yeah.
funny or witty, but they don't make her seem
Like
as
sweet
like,
and more gentle, whereas this
yeah,
is like, no, she was sharp. She was with it.
right. Um, so it's kind of interesting. She has both those sides
Yeah.
about her too, that like softer side that she
Hmm.
babied Elvis a lot. That was her grandson and
Yep.
also could kind of rock with the guys and keep her own.
Definitely.
So Elvis loved his grandma very much, and he
I
often
mean, yeah.
talked about her wonderful buttermilk biscuits. I feel like I want to try those buttermilk biscuits because I
I
just
do
know
too.
Minnie Mae was cooking them up. You know what I mean?
She was.
For
That fresh
sure.
apron on with those biscuits.
So, needless to say, Minnie Mae was a huge figure in Elvis's life, and they had a very close relationship. Joe Esposito talks a little bit more about their relationship, and he recounts a story where Grandma was like squinting at the TV because of her bad eyesight,
Mhm.
and Elvis had said like, "Can you see the TV?" And then she's like, "Oh, it's fine, don't worry about it." But Elvis bought a brand new TV, and apparently during the years when they were touring, Joe saw that like even if they were running late, Elvis still made time to say goodbye to his grandma and make sure she would be okay while he
Mhm.
was on the road. So they were obviously really close.
Yeah.
And I think especially after his mother passed away, she was another maternal figure for him.
Yeah, she took a probably a greater presence in his life at that point.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, that shows like Elvis's caring nature towards her. But we have this quote from Joyce Bova, who kind of gives the other side of the perspective. So Minnie Mae's attitude towards Elvis. And
Hmm.
so she writes in her book, Minnie's favorite subject, as I soon discovered, was her famous grandson, which was okay with me. She has a big drawl that took time to understand. And this is Minnie Mae being quoted. There was somebody I don't know that was making calls here saying that I was old and ugly and that I was embarrassing to Elvis and that I shouldn't be let out to be seen in public. Well, when Elvis heard about that, he got real mad. Tears shone in the old lady's eyes as she went on. And they continue the story that afterwards, Elvis took her for a ride around town, showing her off, letting her know that he loved her more than anything and that he thought that she was beautiful and worth being seen.
Yeah. And he
And I think
paraded
that's
her around
sweet.
after hearing that story that
Yes.
like someone thought she was ugly or
I
embarrassing to
know.
him. That's so mean, first of
It
all.
is.
But
I like
I think
how
it
we get to
shows.
see how Elvis really felt about her.
Right, that he was like took her out, and
Yeah,
made it clear that she was important to him.
exactly.
And she continued like throughout her life and throughout Elvis's life to have a big role in the Presley house.
Mhm. Which I think we
Where
contribute to their close relationship.
Right. And in Larry Geller's book, If I Can
Mhm.
Dream, he says about how Gladys and Elvis were joined in the house once Vernon had left Tupelo to go to Memphis. And Gladys and Elvis were joined by Minnie Mae. So the three of them were living together in the house. And then Minnie Mae continued to live with her grandson, her daughter in law, and her son until she died. So she
Yeah,
always had, apparently, Joe Esposito said she always had a room in
always
Elvis's
did.
house.
Yeah. And I feel like we said before, that Minnie Mae's presence after Gladys passed just became a little bit stronger and more present. And Priscilla was saying, Grandma took care of the household, did the cooking, kept everyone and everything under control. She had the air of a person with a firm purpose in life. And I feel like that solidifies her role in the Presley household in Elvis's life. She became independently, she became the matriarch of that family.
Right. I think she seems like a cool person.
She
I
does.
I would have liked to talk to her chewing her snuff. And I feel like very
Yeah.
different, very contrasting to the depiction we had of Gladys's mother. Um,
Yeah.
I feel like they're very opposite personalities. Gladys's mother
Yeah.
seemed, was like
Very fragile.
sickly and
Yeah.
fragile and a southern doll, and
Mhm.
literally. And
Literally.
yeah, and Dodger was more of like a rough knuckler. I
She was
like
getting it.
that.
She got it
Yeah,
done. She was a
right,
go-getter.
right. Um, so then now we're going to move on a little bit, talk about
Yes.
Elvis's father, Vernon,
Very
son of J.D. Presley and Minnie
Mhm.
Mae. So,
Okay. Yeah, so Vernon was born in Fulton, Mississippi on April 10th, 1960. And unlike a lot of people,
1916.
1916. Shh, not 1960. That would have been a little awkward, I guess. But no,
Yeah.
1916. But no, unlike other people, Vernon did not have a nickname. Not that I'm aware of.
No.
No
But
nicknames that
like
were
we said
commonly
before,
used.
his middle name was Elvis, so that's where they
His
got
yeah.
the
Mhm.
name from. And Priscilla says about Vernon, I feel like when we were learning about his personality and characteristics, it's similar. Like there's two sides kind of
Yeah.
perspectives on who he was and what he was like. So
Mhm.
Priscilla said in Elvis and Me that she was nervous about talking to Vernon, who had a sharp tongue and said exactly what he thought. And if you guys have been to Graceland, you will have seen in
Yeah.
Vernon's office, there's a
Right
sign
outside the
that he had
door.
put up. Yeah, there's a sign that
Yeah.
he had put up. And Priscilla writes about this in her book. She says, Vernon felt my visits kept the girls who are working, like secretaries, who
Mhm.
were from working. And finally, he put a sign on the door specifying in all capital letters, no one belongs to the office unless they work there or have an appointment. And so the sign is still there at Graceland,
It
and
is.
it's like so aggressive. It's kind of
All
funny.
caps. I think it's yeah, all caps, there for everybody to see. I thought that showed his, like, no nonsense, like, "We're getting work done, we're gonna accomplish our goals, no don't bother me."
Absolutely. But then
Yeah.
Vester is like a little bit different in what
Yeah,
he depicts his
Dexter was
brother.
giving us all kinds of different perspectives, like you did on Jesse. Now he's telling us that Vernon was quiet with a reserved, dry sense of humor, kind of like Minnie Mae. Vernon has a way of saying something without even cracking a smile, yet everyone around him is roaring. After a minute or so, a shy grin that reminds you so much of Elvis will appear. So, a little bit different. He's got that dry sense of
Yeah.
humor. He's a little bit fun, I guess, but he's quiet.
Yeah, but then these other people are like, he was mean.
He was mean. We were scared of him. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. But some people thought he was. Now I just have to bring it up. One of my favorite stories about Vernon is the bowl that they had in the kitchen that he thought they were M&Ms, but they were like those little like firecracker poppers, and he just
Oh,
takes a
yes.
handful and puts them. It's stories like that I feel like also kind of give you a perspective on who Vernon really was because it wasn't something that he was mad about, and he kind of laughed at it afterwards.
Even though he put those little firecrackers in his mouth, like
Yeah, but
he was
you
like,
know,
antics.
antics. But he laughed about, it, I'm sure, at the end.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully he wasn't too badly injured.
Yeah, no, I don't think so, but it's a good laugh.
Yeah. So we have a
But
little bit about what Vernon's early years were like.
yes.
So Vester said that they worked closely together, him and his brother
Mhm.
worked closely together in the fields, played when there was time, and that they were really close. And Vester ended up working at Graceland. So he kind of
Yeah.
maintained that closeness. But apparently, Vernon accidentally split Vester's toe down the middle while they were chopping wood. Um, and Vernon also got lowered into a well in a basket, and Vester had to help him get out to keep him from
Yeah.
drowning. So these were some of the kind of antics that were going on in Vernon's early childhood.
Correct, yeah. Boys will be boys. That's what they were doing, splitting
Oh
toes
my
in the middle
goodness.
and dropping
Oh
your brother
yeah.
in the well. You know,
Classic.
classics, exactly. But no, so continuing with Vernon's early childhood, even though he was 17, so that was 1933.
Mhm.
So Vernon was 17 and he was working at a nearby farm with his father. It was rich land. They called it East Bottom. It was in East Tupelo. They were hoeing cotton. They were picking corn, peas, and so basically they were sharecropping. They were sharing the profits. And that's kind of what he did for his early work.
And if you guys remember, Gladys's family was of a similar background. So she came from a
Right.
sharecropping background.
Yeah.
So
Similar times.
Vernon met Gladys when he was 17. And
Mhm.
Vester says, like, oh, he was starting to think about girls and romance
Yep.
and marriage. And Vester says, the girls should be single instead of plural because only one girl really interested him. And her name was Gladys Love Smith. So
Yeah.
then we had the story of Gladys and Vernon meeting, running
Yes.
away
Running
to
away.
elope.
Oh,
And
that
God,
So the quote that we have is Glass and Vernon, who just a year and a half earlier had eloped after a very brief courtship, and I feel like it was very brief.
Yeah, it was like they're gone.
Yes, exactly. After a very brief courtship, we're both children of sharecroppers, as we just said. Vernon's father, JD, was one of 10 illegitimate children. We're getting all the tongue twisters today, which also discrepancy that we were always saying
Yeah.
that there's always some discrepancies in kind of facts that are a little bit older, but 9 or 10, sometimes most people are saying 9.
Yeah.
Yes, but they were saying JD was handsome, mean, and a drinker. His wife, Minnie Mae, was the family backbone, and she doted on her son, Vernon, as Gladys would dote on Elvis.
Yeah. And that was from Larry
Oh,
Geller's book, If I
yes.
Can Dream. So it just kind of shows that, Minnie
The
Mae,
family dynamic, I
yeah,
guess.
the family dynamic, and that Minnie
Mhm.
Mae was so like integral to who Vernon became. And then
Yeah,
obviously that's integral to who Elvis became too.
exactly.
And this is just
And
like a
and
little side note. Shortly
yes.
after Gladys passed away in August 1958, Vernon remarried. So he remarried only a year and a
Mhm.
half later, and Elvis did not attend the wedding. Which, if we think about how close
Yeah.
they were, that's kind of like yikes, yikers.
Yeah. Quite a
Yeah.
statement there on Elvis's behalf.
I think he went to the
Mhm.
lake that day instead. He was like, I'm not doing
Yeah. He was like, "I'm just not gonna show up."
out of
But
here.
yeah. But no, so we got Vernon and Gladys, we got their meeting, and then a short while later, we have Elvis that entered the picture.
Right?
So
1935.
1935, yes. So our first thing that we got is a quote from Jerry Hopkins. He did an Elvis biography, and this kind
It
of
was a really
shows
early biography too. It was
it
from like
was. Yeah.
1971, right? So it's
Yes.
kind of interesting,
It's always interesting to find biographies that were written when Elvis was alive, just kind of get
right?
that modern take.
Right.
But he says, and as Elvis's parents loved him, he returned their love. Both his parents told stories about how upset he'd get when his father plunged into a lake to swim or rush into a burning building to help save a neighbor's furniture. And they're talking that this was the home of his uncle Noah and his aunt Christine. So, yeah, I think that kind of getting into the family dynamics a little bit more, showing the bonds that they have.
Yeah, and Elvis was afraid that something would happen to his father. So his
Mhm.
uncle Noah, his aunt Christine, and his cousin had actually burned in East Tupelo in a fire, in a house fire.
Yeah.
And there was another local fire that burned the church. And so they kind of said that Elvis was afraid of losing his father. And that's why he was like, he experienced a little bit of tragedy early in his life. And so
Yeah.
he was like very attached to his father. And that's why he was always crying about him.
Yeah, which this is definitely gonna pop up a little bit later, I guess.
Right.
He was still young, but I guess it's something that's always gonna stick with the family when it does happen, and that was when Vernon actually got sent to jail for altering that check, which is something that we talked about in our first podcast episode.
Mhm.
So, it's a little bit of a weird story. We're going back a little bit to JD. So,
Mhm.
they're saying a this is a quote from also Elvis Australia, but they're saying a bond for bail was fixed at $500 each on January 4th, 1938. Only 2 bonds were filed for Travis, and I guess we're gonna say Leather.
Who was the other?
Or
So there were three men
yes.
involved in the
Mhm.
forging of the check,
Correct.
and that was Vernon, Travis, and this guy Leather.
That's the pronunciation. If it's not right, please let us
I
know.
don't know.
We don't we're not pronunciation experts here.
Mhm.
But so we're always bringing the facts. So they're saying that the records were showing that Vernon's father, JD, and J.G. Brown stood sureties for Travis Smith, but not Vernon. Now, what they're saying about this is that they found documentation for Travis, but there's just no documentation period for Vernon. So it's not saying that it didn't happen or it did happen, but there's definitely no documentation.
Yeah, there's no clear documentation
Yes.
that JD sort of vouched for his own son, but there is that he vouched for Travis. So apparently
Interesting.
it is interesting
Yeah.
father son dynamic. And
Mhm.
Some people have alleged it's because he never likes Vernon. He had kicked him out of his house.
Yeah.
And apparently it's a little hard to find the truth just because
Hmm.
there's no proof that Jesse bailed out his son doesn't mean that there is definitive proof that he didn't. So it's just an
Correct.
interesting thing to consider,
Yes.
consider their relationship and how obviously this was a really tumultuous time in Vernon's life.
Hmm.
He was getting arrested. He had a young son at home, his wife, his mother is moving in with his son and his wife.
Hmm.
And, if there was some kind of tension between him and his father, that would have been pretty heartbreaking to deal with. But yeah.
Absolutely. And this kind of ties in. So eventually, in this we're talking about still the Great Depression times. People are looking for work. And so Vernon was doing all kinds of odd jobs, as most people were back then. And this is also from Jerry Hopkins. He's quoted saying, as Elvis was growing up, his father moved from job to job, leading the milk delivery route when they weren't customers enough to continue it, working crops in the bottom, which we were talking about, sorting lumber and hiring out as an apprentice carpenter. He get whatever he could get, he took.
Right. And so part of this also led to the move to Memphis.
Mhm.
That obviously shaped a lot of who Elvis became musically and personally and all
Absolutely.
that. So Vernon moved in earlier in the 1940s when
Mhm.
Elvis was about 10, so around 45. He moved to
Yeah.
Memphis like ahead of his family to try and find a job there. He was working kind of sporadically there, so it wasn't super
Mhm.
consistent, but he was 3 hours away from his family in Tupelo. And he hoped to move the family over there. Eventually, of course, we know the family relocated to Memphis in 1948. So Minnie Mae, Elvis, Gladys,
Mhm.
Vernon, they all moved over to Memphis. And apparently there was some like hesitancy on Elvis's part. He was nervous about it because he thought,
Yeah.
oh, my dad's been there for a while and like didn't really have a consistent job. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like a nerve wracking
Yeah.
move.
Understandably.
Um, but Vernon did eventually find um, pretty
Yes.
steady employment a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, so in February of 1949, Vernon began working as a laborer at the United Paint Company. And putting that a little bit in perspective, so back then he was paid 83 cents an hour, so we're coming out to about 38.50 per week. They said that is a good week. And he would sometimes pick up 5 hours overtime. And giving you that nice comparison, that's about $508 today.
Right. So he was making $500 a week,
Yeah.
which is really not very much. Especially he had not only his son and his wife as his dependents, but also his
Mhm.
mother.
Yeah.
And so I just think that's kind of an interesting plot. And
It is?
he didn't keep this particular job. Um, Even when they moved to Memphis, Vernon was still bouncing around from job to job.
Mhm.
But even though they had made some money in spring of 1952, the family still fell behind on their expenses and they moved for their home. And so there was just a lot of inconsistency
Definitely.
in the money area, um,
Mhm.
which it's kind of different from how I guess Jesse I mean, not really. I guess it's the same as Jesse kind of like not being super steady.
No, I feel like it was still kind of you get what you get,
Right.
and you're just gonna take it. Kind
Right.
of, I guess the example is when Minnie Mae and Jesse were separating, it's like, "I got a job. I'm
Right.
gonna go take it because I need the work." And that's
Right.
kind of, I guess, how Vernon ended up living. It's, "Oh, here's a job. I'm gonna take it because we need the money."
Right. So he didn't
But
like commit to one kind of career
yeah,
anymore. But
but
later in his life, he did
yes,
have a more consistent career.
he did.
So he worked with and for Elvis, mostly on the
Mhm.
financial side of things.
Yeah, and I feel like this really, though, started when he kind of was, like, okay with the Colonel. The Colonel hooked him in, reeled him in, and he is quoted as saying, "The Colonel had completely won over Elvis Presley," and that is from Marion Keisker. Am I
Mhm.
saying that right? Yes.
Yeah, so Marion kind of saw the way that Vernon
Mhm.
was won over by the colonel and kind of like the glitz and
Yes.
glamour of it.
Yeah,
And
talking about the
apparently,
signing of the contracts.
right. So when
Yeah.
Elvis Elvis's parents signed his contract to the colonel for him because at the time he was not 21. So
Mhm.
he was considered underage. And for him to do that, he kind of had to convince his parents that, the colonel was a good candidate to be his manager.
Yeah.
Um, and Marion Keisker, who worked at Sun Studios,
Mhm.
she kind of notes the change in Vernon's personality a little bit after Elvis started to gather some fame.
Mhm.
So she said, Mr. Presley, talking about Vernon, had become very antagonistic. And whereas a year earlier, Elvis had stood there with tears streaming down his face, saying, "This is what I've always wanted, my very own record." All of a sudden, under the suggestion of the Colonel, Sun Studios had become totally dependent on Elvis. And kind of Vernon sort of bought into that. It seems at least
Yeah.
that's what Marion says that she observed, that he was really taken by the whole thing.
And then he quickly, I think, just deep dove in it and he became almost like I feel like the center of the workings of Elvis's career. I mean, mainly the personal side, his personal finances.
Mhm.
That was his full-time job at that point. That was his responsibility, and it didn't change until the day he died.
Right. And Vester says that Elvis didn't want anyone except for his father to sort of handle his affairs. Um, and he also says that Vester was a good worker who was dependable, honest, and loved his son like no other could. So it's no wonder that Elvis can rest easy knowing his financial affairs are in good hands. Um,
Yeah,
it's just interesting that,
it is.
we learned before that Vernon never graduated from high school. Um, and it's interesting that Elvis like trusted him so much to have him in charge of you know,
Mhm.
his financial situation when he didn't necessarily have the education to kind of like back that up. And Elvis was
Yeah,
reeling in more money than that family had ever seen. Um,
but I
but
feel
the
like that
family
just
was so close.
mhm. That shows, like, their bond, yeah. He
Right.
trusted him more than anybody else. He thought, "Okay, on a personal level, my father has my best interests versus anybody else I know."
Right.
Which goes to show when and this is a quote from A Presley Speaks. This is his Aunt Nash talking, and he's saying that, um, she says, "My dad ha" this is Elvis saying, by the way. Elvis is quoted as saying, "My dad has the weight of the world on his shoulders. God gave me the talent, but my dad is the brains behind the business."
Mhm.
And like that shows the relationship, that shows Vernon's skills and ability and that trust that he was able to get from other people.
And even if we get like a little bit off topic, much later,
Yeah.
Elvis trusted Vernon to fire some of
Oh,
his
yeah.
closest members from the
Yeah.
Memphis Mafia. Like he kind of made his dad do his dirty work a
Mhm.
little bit for him.
A little
But,
bit.
they must have, I just think it must be strange to have your father be in
Mhm.
charge of something that's so business-like, but then also be so
Yeah.
present in your life in that capacity that Vernon was in Elvis's.
Mhm.
And it's so different from the relationship between Vernon and Jesse.
Definitely. And
Like,
it's something we talked about. There was a bit of that strain. You have Jesse that did kick Vernon out of the house, kind of, forced him out, telling him, go do your own thing.
mhm,
It's very different from what you get from Elvis and Vernon, and then
mhm.
even kind of later on in Vernon's life, after Elvis is an adult, Elvis had made it. There's a bit of a bond that was reconstructed there.
Right. So while Minnie Mae she never called Jesse by his name. She always just called him that son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Um, Vernon ended up mending his relationship with his father, and they kept in touch by phone and by letter.
Mhm.
Um, Vernon apparently invited Jesse to Graceland one time, and I feel like that's definitely awkward.
That's awkward. And
For Minnie Mae.
specifically and this is from Alana Nash, and they're saying this is from Baby Let's Play House. And they're saying that this is at Graceland. You got Gladys, you got Vernon, you got Minnie Mae, then you have her ex-husband, and then also his new wife. It's
Mhm.
just a little weird.
This like
But thanks for
estranged husband who like deserted his
yeah,
family or, went finding work and never came back.
crazy. Whichever the case was.
Yeah, I think it's must have been awkward for Vernon
It's just
to
like,
have like
awkward.
his a little bit estranged father there with him and in this big
Yeah.
house that's so different from how he grew up and
Mhm.
all of that. It's just like really, I think it's interesting that there was both,
Mhm.
Minnie Mae only ever referring to him as that son of a bitch, and then
Oh, yeah.
Vernon kind of trying to repair
Men
his
thing.
relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Um,
But that's, I feel like, a good about the story, and then we're kinda getting towards the end here, the end of, Vernon's life going chronologically. So, it's always been known that the Presley side of the family, they suffered from, like, chronic heart disease. Vernon was an exception. So, towards the end of his life, he was in poor health. He had several heart attacks, and these heart attacks, the health issues that Vernon dealt with, they weighed heavily on Elvis. Due to their close relationship, he was always very worried about his father, and, often he had Vernon on tour with him, though.
right. He often took Vernon on tour with him. There's a video of him saying, I'm so glad my dad is here with me,
Yeah.
because he's been sick. And so definitely in some of those later years of Elvis's life, when his father was sick and he was
Mhm.
not well himself, that definitely weighed on him. And given that he lost his mother, when he was quite young,
Yeah.
I think he was always worried he would lose his father. Like the story
Mhm.
said that he always cried because he worried about his dad. So I don't think that changed as Elvis got older or as Vernon got older. I think it probably
Yeah.
got worse as he had more serious health issues.
Okay.
Um, and so Elvis passes away in 1977, and Vernon
Yeah.
outlives him.
Yeah.
Uh, Apparently, after Elvis passes away, Vernon takes over all of the business affairs at Graceland, but the house is still not open. It doesn't open until 1982.
Yes.
Um, and Minnie Mae is still living there. Vernon's sister Delta Mae is also still living there. And they tried to keep things the way that they were when Elvis passed away. So it was very much like a functioning house, not a museum. Vernon lived there
Yeah.
with his mother and his sister. And eventually, on June 26, 1979, Vernon suffered a final and fatal heart attack and he passed away.
Yeah, and kind of just to put a summary on this whole thing and kind of going back to Minnie Mae, it was Minnie Mae ended up outliving her daughter-in-law, her grandson, and her son, and she ended up passing away on May 8th, 1980. But in Priscilla's book, Elvis and Me, she kind of sums up everything in this one statement saying, talking about Vernon, he was overwhelmed with grief. Did I know anything that would help him to understand why his son had died? He never fully accepted it, and I believe his pain led to his own death, just as Grandma never recovered from Vernon's death.
Right. So Vernon passed away like a year, almost 2 years after
Mhm.
Elvis. And then Minnie Mae passes away not long after. I mean,
Yeah,
less than a year, like 11
correct.
months later. Um, so I feel like the family was so close, and those
Yeah.
tragedies kind of emphasized how close they were and how much they all needed each other. Um,
Mhm.
so
I I
this
think you're
kind of
absolutely right.
circles, right? It circles it all back. After Gladys passes away in 1958, Elvis, like, it seems to us that he made a conscious effort to keep the rest of his family close, especially this Presley
Yeah.
side of the family, until the day he died. And his father was involved with business matters, with personal matters. Minnie Mae lived at Graceland. His aunt Delta lived at Graceland. His uncle Vesser worked at the guardhouse.
Billy and
And
his
I mean,
wife lived there.
right, all the cousins, dozens of cousins. We will touch on
Dozens
the
of cousins. Yeah,
cousins
yes, we will.
at a later date. I mean, they maintained this close
Mhm.
family unit even when their lives had completely changed from the
Yep.
poor upbringing they'd had in Tupelo, to living in this mansion in Memphis.
Mhm.
And they kept that close family unit, especially with that side of the family. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, that was about Minnie
that's
Mae,
Minnie Mae.
Dee, and Vernon, all very
Yes,
interesting figures and all people who, in one way or another, had an effect on Elvis's life and
definitely.
got through it.
Yeah. So that wraps up the paternal side of Elvis's family. Now we covered both sets of grandparents. We covered both of his parents. So we definitely have a couple other family members we want to discuss in the coming weeks.
Probably cousins.
Cousins.
Cousins is going to be a long one. Oh my goodness. But
Oh,
that's
do my
what we're going to be
best.
touching on. Yeah.
Yep. So that's it.
That's it. That's all we have for today. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Chronicles of the King podcast.
If you love what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback helps bring the King's story to life.
You can follow us on social media at the Chronicles of the King for updates, upcoming series, and more. We'd love to hear your input and any of your favorite Elvis moments.
Until next time, keep rocking and rolling, and we'll be back soon with more stories from Elvis's extraordinary life.
With TLC, we'll see you on the next episode of the Chronicles of the King.